Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Alone in the Dark. For those not across it, the way I do overviews is I just take a look at a game for the first 2 hours, being that that's the Steam refund window. And Steam in their infinite wisdom feel that you can make up your mind about a game in the first 2 hours, and I kind of agree. If you're not sold on something after 2 hours, chances are you're going to feel the same way after 20. And so this allows me to spread myself around, cover lots of different games, and give you a punchy under 10-minute video that's got a bit of a soft verdict in it and broad strokes mechanics. Straight out of the gate, I really like this so far. It's coming out of THQ as a publisher who we just covered Outcast from them as well. Same sort of double A jank sensibilities. I love that game and thought it was a romp. That's very much a Euro jank open world adventure. This is, I suppose you could say, more Western, obviously based on the Alone in Dark series, more specifically the original. This is pretty much, from what I understand as someone who didn't play the original, a straight remake, a la the way that they've sort of done the Resident Evils over time. So it's definitely got that janky appeal, which isn't something you see a whole lot in the survival horror space. You do have your tentpole releases, but the genre isn't super highly represented, so it's cool to have another entry that's a lot of fun. I will say, just credentials and background, I love things like Resident Evil. Survival horror is my jam, and I would actually argue that the better survival horrors aren't actually scary per se. They're set in a horror setting, they can be quite oppressive and deal with all sorts of creepy subject matter and have some jump scares and that, but like Resident Evil's not really a scary series, apart from maybe 7, and I kind of bounce off things like Outlast, where it goes less survival and more just pure abject horror where you hide in cupboards to get away from enemies. This is very much in my camp. This is very much like the modern Resident Evils, except of course it's very janky and very double A. However, it's got what it needs where it matters. Specifically things like the itemization, straight copied or lifted or inspired, choose your wording, from the modern Resident Evils that are doing that sort of over-the-shoulder perspective, like Resident Evil 4 recently. You know, your bolt cutters, your keys, that sort of limited, light inventory quest item management is there, and it's really solid. The UI and map readability, because it is set in a mansion, the Derceto Mansion, just like the original Alone in the Dark, and much like, you know, Resident Evil 1 Remake, for example. So it's got all the color coding of whether you've explored a room fully or not, or if there's puzzles there. I wouldn't call that hand-holding, I would call that expected parts of the genre where it kind of, you know, rubs the line with Metroidvanias, the back and forth puzzling, exploring. And honestly, I list these things off because as someone who is a fan of the genre, this is what's actually important to me. I love it. I love kind of 100% scrubbing out the map, figuring out where to go next. The itemization systems are really cool. As far as like consumables, it's pretty much health items and pistol bullets at the moment. Also worth mentioning, you're playing as these two main characters that are very much modeled off of their real-life counterparts. You got that goober from bloody Stranger Things, but I've been playing as the chick from The Last Duel, and it's got that uncanny, dare I say, like LA Noire sort of valley, lifelike faces painted over models, and it's wild, it's weird. It's actually got a soundtrack that's quite evocative of LA Noire as well, at least like the very sort of slow, sort of low vibe kind of soundtrack. It hasn't really had a big punchy chase sequence music, not yet or anything. Yeah, even though it's not really the same time period, it's still, or even setting, or even genre, it still actually is giving me a lot of LA Noire vibes in a good way. The mystery's kind of interesting, and again, if you've played the original Alone in the Dark, this might be suck eggs, but I haven't. Even though I'm an old boy, that predates me. But it's set in this sort of mansion which acts as like a psychiatric internment space, you know, a bit of a rest, and you're investigating this dude that's kind of gone missing and you're trying to figure out the core of it. I'm not going to do what all the mainstream reviews and bloody tell you too much and wreck it. It's interesting. It's set in that sort of Louisiana southern environment, which is kind of cool to see, especially in a period piece such as this. And, you know, it comes up against the locals with their drawl and their accents, but also things like voodoo seems to play into this a lot. Anyway, the mystery is actually fairly compelling, and I don't want to give away what little I've seen so far. I will say, like, combat controls and all that, very janky, okay? Your mileage is going to vary. The combat and the gunplay is kind of weak, to be honest. I still say that while recommending what I've played of this, but, you know, let's be honest, it's not the strongest. There seems to be like a sort of melee system, not really quite like Callisto Protocol, but I don't know, kind of like The Last of Us. You've got exhaustible multi-shot melee weapons, which are a bit of a power item, and my few combat encounters, your pistol kind of feels like a bit of a pea shooter, and the ammo you go through fairly quickly, especially if you panic mag dump, the accuracy just disappears. And so I found myself sort of running around the environment picking up weapons and throwables like Molotovs and that. You can't actually hold on to them, you can only just throw them from the spawn point, which is kind of clever actually. It's forcing me to more dynamically interact with, well, interactables during a fight as opposed to just standing in a corner and relying on pistol. I'm not sure if this dynamism is particularly intended, but it's actually kind of fun, kind of cool. But the monsters are sort of spongy and not particularly terrifying so far. So I would say sort of the combat is the weakest part. But as far as the intrigue, the hook, there's been a couple of puzzles already and they're all pretty solid. It's got all that in the right places. The general mouthfeel, the vibe. I would say the soundtrack's kind of weak as someone who's really into audio. So that's a little bit sad, but you know, if you're getting the vibe that broadly speaking, I think this is pretty awesome, then you would be right. So yeah, just a quick little thing on the back of it as well. I've had a bit of a tantrum recently about reviewing in general. I'm not particularly drawn to the idea of putting 40 hours into a game just to meet an embargo. However, I enjoy this middle ground of overviews, which people just call these reviews in my comments anyway. And as far as I can tell, this serves the purpose that many are looking for. They don't necessarily need someone to bang a drum and write a think piece critique about the game to the nth degree. Some idiot bogan with a microphone who's played a few hours and can give you the broad strokes from one gamer to another seems to be something of value. So I don't know if I'll be reviewing this. I don't know if I'll be reviewing anything at least under the sort of formal accepted measure, but you know, for what it's worth, I'm going to keep chipping away at this and playing it. I'd like to play it through. You play as the two different characters and I wouldn't mind getting through and playing as the other one, and they've sort of got this collectible system that unlocks hidden knowledge, but you only get it by picking up stuff from both playthroughs, so that's kind of compelling and interesting, to be perfectly honest. So I think the playability is there, but obviously take it with a grain of salt. This is, as intended, only supposed to be a cursory look at the first few hours. But from what I understand and from what my audience has told me, that's more than enough for a lot of people that are just trying to find out whether this game's good or bad. And I rate it. As a survival horror fan, I very much am enjoying this for what it is, which is kind of a janky AA entry into the space. The more the merrier. This sort of thing I want to see more of. Anyway, if you made it this far and you have any thoughts around my format or anything like that, maybe even just, well, I mean, I don't necessarily need a pat on the head, but if you are just happy with these 2-hour overviews that give you the information that you need to know whether this is something to pique your interest or put in the bin, then let me know, because I'd appreciate feedback right about now. Anyway, team, I'll just leave it there for the time being and I'll catch you guys on the next one.